Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I want to talk about how and why I use higher calorie days during fat loss for myself and clients. And I'll talk about how they can actually help you in the fat loss process. But first, before we do that, if you want to learn more about a body recomp, what it is, how to do it, the 10 things that you need to do to achieve that, plus why it's important to focus on your body composition, the two types of body recomp that you can be in, go in and out of. If you want to learn more about all that, the link to that is in the show notes there. All right. So I want to talk about how and why I use higher calorie days during fat loss and for myself and for clients and how it can be helpful. Again, I think a lot of times people think fat loss is just this kind of misconception that it should just be this continuous kind of push down the entire time. You just have to push, and anytime you're not eating in a deficit, you're just going backwards. And it doesn't have to be that way. And in certain situations, it should not be that way. There's going to be certain situations where we almost need to incorporate these days in to a fat loss plan. And I'll go over how most people end up shooting themselves in the foot here with that. Basically, this is something that I've really implemented with myself, particularly in this fat loss phase. So just for example here, and once I go over everything, I think it will make more sense. But so I'm recording this on June 27th. So like, usually on Friday, like I feel like I end up being at kind of my lowest weight, and and depending on how I'm feeling and where I'm at, it will lead to me wanting to do a higher calorie day. For example, my average weight last week was 159.8. And then this week coming into the week, I was 157.4, then 159.2, then 157.8, then 156.2 today. So I put on my story, time for a higher calorie day. And I'll explain why that is. I think the first thing though, I need to clear up front is you still need to be in a calorie deficit to lose body fat. Okay. So if this is a strategy that you're trying to implement and now you're not actively in a deficit, you're not seeing your weight trend down over time, and you don't have any signs that you're in a deficit, then this is not going to work for you. So our higher calorie days cannot consistently erase our deficit, because otherwise we're just spinning our wheels, and that's going to be frustrating. That's typically how, if you're really struggling with fat loss, that's what happened, right? People will have lower calorie days and then they have these higher calorie days on accident. And that leads to them spinning their wheels. So we do need to be strategic about it, because there can be value in incorporating these strategically during a fat loss phase. Are they going to boost your metabolism or speed up fat loss? No, they're not. They're not magic in that sense that, oh, there's some magic thing going on that I eat higher calories and now all of a sudden I'm going to drop weight. It's not really going to do anything from that. However, there are some things that I do think they can do. And so I think really before I go into what they can do, I think the big thing is when again, a lot of times you'll see people just try and push through their fat loss the entire time, and that can lead to them eventually doing these higher calorie days without, again, on accident, and then that leads to them consuming more calories. But if we can incorporate these, one, you're going to see an improved performance in the gym, and what that means is that's going to lead to better body composition. You're going to have more muscle as you drop body fat. You're going to retain more muscle. You're going to just lose, like, the weight that you lose is going to be more body fat if we can maintain a higher level of performance there. It's going to help with recovery and energy. So again, when you're constantly in a calorie deficit, one, you're just going to feel like you're going to have lower energy. You're going to feel depleted. You're going to, again, training, you may not recover as quickly, and you just may feel like more worn down in general. And it's going to certainly help with that mentally and physically. They can reduce psychological fatigue from dieting. So there obviously is that. So it can be nice to have a day or two. And again, however you implement this ultimately is up to you, where you can eat a little bit more calories. It can make your plan more livable and sustainable. So it's okay. Again, in a perfect world, yeah, maybe you just diet, or again, like you just be able to stick to your diet, but there's a lot of things that go on that make that challenging to always stick to. So it can make it more sustainable for people. And then the big thing that it does that I really have found a huge benefit is it reduces stress-related adaptations in certain populations. So we're talking women in particular and leaner individuals. And I'll talk about that here in a little bit more detail overall. But again, I think the stress related thing, because a energy deficit is a stressor on the body, and there are certain adaptations that happen over time. I'm sure people have heard about metabolic adaptation. Now, again, that's just a short-term thing, but it's not going to reduce. It's not like it's going to be this magic thing that now there is no sort of adaptation, metabolic adaptation, but it can help with that. Because again, really metabolic adaptation is essentially, in order to lose body fat, you need to be in a deficit. We're going to adapt to that. And then ultimately, the leaner you get, your body is going to adapt a bit as you get leaner and it has less body fat. So you can't really do anything about that. So again, it's going to more so be a potential better performance in the gym. You're going to feel better overall. It's going to be a little bit more sustainable. And again, from a psychological standpoint. However, there are some stress related adaptations that I think it can be helpful with. So when are they most needed? When are we really going to want to use these? Because somebody hears this and the wrong person might try and do this and it might not be useful for them. And so I'll talk some situations where it may be more useful than other times. So one, the leaner you are and the leaner you get, the need for these over time are going to go up. Because again, if you're just like always in a deficit, like there are going to be some stress related adaptations to that mentally and physically. And that's going to happen the leaner you get. Now, for some people, they can handle it a little bit better, just depending on sex differences, genetic differences. The longer and more aggressive you have been dieting, the higher the need you're going to have for these at some point. I think the best way I could say this is it's like a deload for training. At some point, you're probably going to need to dial back how hard you train. It's going to be the same thing here with this. But again, the longer, more aggressively you have been dieting, these are going to be a little bit more needed. If you train hard and you care about performance, plus maybe you have a high training output, again, your need for these are going to go up with that. Maybe you're feeling super depleted, flat, or unmotivated. So now it's, hey, you're really feeling training go downhill. You're just feeling super unmotivated, like just flat, like just small and flat. Again, you are at a higher need of potentially using these. You're someone who tends to feel stress harder in a deficit. So I've talked about this before, but women tend to have a larger stress response to energy deficits. So there's someone in particular that may be at a higher need of using these. But if you are someone that you do have a large stress response to dieting, like what does that look like? It could be like this could be like you notice like, you feel super hungry. Obviously, we would want to look at methods and how we're going about it. But just generally speaking, who would this be if you have a high stress response? It's just like you just constantly feel super stressed. You have a high stress load like outside of the gym, right? Like this, maybe you're retaining water. You just feel inflamed. Like to me, that's someone who would have a potential high stress to dieting. Now, this is where it's okay. Is it from the deficit or is it lifestyle stress that's causing it? Is it other things that's going on? That's where you have to know your body, somebody that understands your body to make that decision there with that. So again, if you're someone who tends to feel stress harder in a deficit, you would be at a higher need to use these. And again, women in general tend to have that higher stress response to dieting. And so they would be at a higher risk of using these higher calorie days. Or you just need a mental break as well too. So you're just mentally fried from a deficit. And again, there's a psychological fatigue that's going to build up when you're in a deficit. And so if that's you, this could be something that we implement there. Now, with these higher calorie days, we have to weigh all these things in, and then we have to just understand the unique psychology of the client that's doing it. Of like, for some clients, having this higher caloric day may lead to some issues. We'll talk about how to actually manage these there. So again, you don't have to have all of these, but the more you have, the more you'll benefit from some higher calorie days. The less of these you have, the less of a need there will be. And I do think there is a little bit of a kind of magnitude of each one that increases it, right? So the leaner you get, again, the magnitude of that is, okay, for the most part, the leaner you are, you're probably going to have to implement some higher calorie days throughout your week, potentially. You have a super high training output, like you do want performance to be okay. Again, you might be someone like the magnitude of that is a lot higher potentially for someone to use a refeed day there. If you're unmotivated, it's okay. That's not really a huge thing. Like we need to look into that. Now, again, we would weigh it across everything here and make our decision. But yeah, but generally speaking, the more of these you have, the higher the need there. But so let's someone who has moderate body fat levels, they haven't been dieting super aggressively, and they've only been dieting for 3 weeks, they're going to have a less of a need to take one of these days than someone else. Now, if you're leaner, you have a high training output and you've been dieting for multiple weeks, okay, maybe for you, we need to start to look into this. Again, body fat levels are going to be key here. So this is like, all right, if a client is starting a fat loss diet, they're at moderate or higher levels of body fat. We're not going overly aggressive with the diet strategy. It's like they don't necessarily need these. Now we would weigh the mental side of things if maybe they need that. So that's where that would come into play there. But from a physiological standpoint, that client avatar would not need a refeed day. And even if you are leaner, if you're you shouldn't really be starting a diet if you're super lean, unless you're competing. Okay. You have a competition, then maybe you are going to start leaner. But generally speaking, like most people shouldn't start super lean in a fat loss phase. So that's like automatically like at the beginning of a fat loss phase, you're probably not going to need these. So this again wouldn't be something that I would throw in for sure. Now, knowing the client, and there's going to be some situations where maybe it is something that we do throw in right off the bat. But in most cases, when you first start a fat loss diet, you really don't need to do these for at least the first couple weeks. But again, we can't underestimate the mental side of things and how this can be helpful, even if from a physiological standpoint, you wouldn't necessarily need one of these. Big takeaway being like, with the leaner you get, you're going to start to need to use these. I had this conversation with Dr. Eric Helms last week on the podcast, so go check that out there. And basically talk about as you get leaner, like you pretty much are going to need to implement these. A lot of people that get leaner and they get ready for a show and they want to get super lean, they don't implement these. And then that's where they get themselves into trouble. They lose lean body mass. The biggest thing being with that, not only are you going to take the stress off, the overall stress on the body, but from a body comp standpoint, you're likely going to maintain more muscle in this state. And if you are at moderate levels of body fat and you implement these on your hard training days, you can have better training and you may find that you can build a little bit of muscle in that process, which in turn is going to be better for your body composition. So that's where I come back to overall when we can incorporate these versus just depleting ourselves, trying to push through, feeling super low energy, feeling super depleted, and we just keep trying to push through. I do think that's going to lead to worse body comp outcomes in the long run there. So how are we going to implement these? So ideally, we're going to pair them with higher output and or tougher training days. So this wouldn't, if we implemented a higher caloric day, like we wouldn't want it to be something that we just throw on a low movement day. Like you want to, ideally, we're increasing our movement a little bit here on those days. We want to increase calories mostly from foods that you are already eating. So we're not trying to just, okay, hey, I'm going to have this higher calorie day. Now I'm just going to eat a bunch of pizza and donuts and everything like that. Like mostly increase calories from the foods that we're already eating. I'll go over an example of myself, how I'm doing this. We still want to keep protein high and we still want to get fiber and micronutrients in. So we still need to have a high quality diet. And it's not an excuse to binge. We still want to aim for structure on these days because really the goal should be we should increase calories to maintenance and not in a surplus. So you do need to have some sort of moderation on this day because if you don't and you're in a fat loss phase, you have that fatigue, you're probably going to be a little bit hungrier. And this is why all these things that I talked about are going to be helpful. They can offset your likelihood of you over consuming calories here. What would be a not great way to do this? What would be you do it on a low output day, you get 2,000 steps, you add in a bunch of just super calorie dense type foods. You don't focus on protein that day and don't get in any fiber or micronutrients and you just go way over. That's going to lead to you probably binging and eating a lot more calories than you need to there. So that would be the opposite of what we would want to do. But again, I think the big thing being we want it to be mostly at maintenance here. If you dip into a small surplus, how would you know? Again, I think if we pair it with high output and good training, you should be good to go. And really at the end of the day, what you would do is, unfortunately, there is going to be a little bit of a lag here of, okay, let's see where things are trending over time. Or is your weight trending down? Is it not? Okay, then if it's not, and you're not visibly getting leaner, because as you get leaner, scale weight can get a little bit more noisy in terms of what's going on. And if you don't feel like you're visibly getting leaner, then we need to maybe rethink our strategy here with these higher calorie days during fat loss. What we're probably going to add mostly would be carbohydrates. It's okay if you add a little bit more protein, you add a little bit more fats, but I think generally speaking, we want to increase our carbohydrate intake. And again, I'll talk to you about what mine looks like in terms of how I do this and when I know it's the right time for me to do it. If you do these right, there's really no downside other than it's potentially going to be a slightly slower weekly fat loss over time, right? If you think about it, you put someone who's in a deficit every single day versus someone who has 1 to 2 maintenance days. Obviously, when you look at those weeks next to each other, that's obviously the person who's in the straight deficit's likely going to lose more weight. It could be a little bit more muscle potentially, which I'll get at here in a minute. But again, now we have to think, okay, so in the short term, yes, maybe a little bit slower, but in the long term, what's that going to look like? This reminds me a lot of the muscle building hypertrophy research where it's okay. Yeah. In the short term, 8 weeks, you can push yourself super hard. You can do certain things, but if we zoom that out, what does that look like? So it's the same kind of thing here. It's in the short term, if you had to lose the most amount of fat in 3 weeks, we wouldn't want to implement this, but that's usually not the case. It's usually in order to really lose body fat, like we have to be in a deficit, but we have to be in a deficit for a period of time. It's not just going to happen over 2 weeks. Okay. And so what this does is this one allows you to stay in that deficit longer and actually stick to it. Okay. Which is ultimately going to lead to fat loss. But the other benefit is you're going to feel better and your training could be better. And that's going to mean better training output, which means you're more likely to maintain muscle. So you're going to have a better body composition. So really at the end, you could argue that over a 68-week span or longer, that person, they would lose more body fat and they would have a better body composition. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do in fat loss phases. We're trying to make sure that whatever we like, we want to see our weight trend down, but we want to make sure that where that weight's coming from is more fat than muscle. And a lot of times if you just push through and you don't ever take these days, as counterintuitive as it sounds, again, you could lose the same weight, but from a body comp perspective, you might have less muscle there. So that's, again, really the only downside is that's a day or two that you're not in a deficit. And so again, this is where it comes back to making sure that the amount that you're eating that day is close to your estimated maintenance there. But again, if they help you stick to it long term, then that trade is often worth it. Plus, I do believe, as I said, you'll see better body comp at the end by implementing this. So for me, how I'm doing it, so I come in today at 156.2. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to have 1 to 2 days. We'll see. It's going to be based on how the next couple of days go. But this has been my strategy the whole time, is now over the weekend, I may enjoy myself a little bit more, but I'm still getting a good base of whole foods in on there. So Friday, on the 27th, this will be out a week from today. What I did is had in my smoothie, I added in, instead of half a cup of oats, now I'm doing a full cup of oats. And then we have this bar from Sam's. It's like a granola type bar. I also ate that, right? So I'm going to have that. And then I'm going to eat normal lunch, might add in a little bit of extra, like maybe half a bagel or something like that potentially. And then tonight, my dad and I are watching the NHL draft. So I'm going to have some pizza and some wings. Hey, you hear that and you're like, I thought you said not to add more. I'm going to enjoy, but I have to understand that like I'm going to be able to enjoy it, but I can't like just stuff myself with that, right? I'm going to have to monitor it, but I'm also going to keep movement high. I'm going to get my lift in, which is a pretty good workout today. So those are going to be the changes that I'll specifically make here with that. And this doesn't always happen, right? It's not I'm always adding in that type of food. It's usually I'm just increasing the amount that I am typically having, or maybe it will be a sushi night instead. So something like that, to where I'm still getting some carbs, some protein, but I'm getting that base in, right? That's a big thing. But with this meal tonight, I'll probably bring something that's veggie focused, so I have veggie, and then I'll probably bring like a Greek yogurt to make sure I get some protein into. So I'm still sticking to it. I'm just going to allow myself to eat a little bit more there, understanding that something like pizza and wings is very calorically dense. So you have to watch that, because it can be easy to overdo it there. But I'm going to try and set myself up to manage it as best as I can by getting in all my nutrient dense foods throughout the day, still staying active and lifting, right? And then bringing stuff to eat with that meal versus just eating it by itself there, and staying hydrated as well too there. So that's typically how I'll do it. And then, now that allows me to, one, still enjoy my lifestyle, but also I can push my deficit on other days. And again, I'm also doing this if I hit a new low and if I'm feeling depleted, right? Those are typically the things that I'm looking at with that. Is I want to make sure that, like, if I would have so like, for example, if I would have came in today at 159 and I wasn't feeling super depleted, I would have been like, all right, probably not going to really be able to have that tonight. But I knew that this was going to be happening for a couple of days. So I was really able to stay on top of my deficit, increase my deficit maybe a little bit more, or just stay on top of it. And then boom, allow this set me up to be able to go and do this there. It can be planned, or it can be a kind of reactive thing, right? So it can be, you could do it where it's like, hey, once a week, I'm doing a day at my maintenance calories, or it can be reactive. Like I feel like I'm being a little bit more reactive to it, to where it's okay, I know I can increase my overall caloric intake a little bit based on where things are at, where I haven't been like, I'm doing this for sure. This week was a little bit different. And this is where we can use events potentially to work around this. But again, it can be part planned, it can be all planned, and it can be part planned, part reactive, or it can be all reactive, right? There's different ways that we can go about this. And it just depends on the client and where they're at on there. That's how we'll utilize these during fat loss. And again, if I were not seeing my weight trend down and I was doing these, I would definitely have to rethink my strategy with this, right? Because at the end of the day, like, there's so many different ways that we can go about it. But if we have a certain result that we want to get, we want to see where the data that can tell us if we're heading in the right direction or not. And if it's not heading in the right direction, then we need to reevaluate what we're doing. I just bring this up because I've had calls with, when people talk about potentially joining the program, it's how many days do you have people train? It's just so dependent on like where you're at. If you can stick to this, that's what we're going to do. And then if we're not seeing the results, then we need to go in and we need to change it to what you need. And that's ultimately what I do within the performance recon method. It's results driven, right? We have our protocols. We have things that I think will work best for you based on where you're currently at. And then we apply them, have you stick to them, see what's working, see what's not, see what other limiting factors you have, and then we adjust based on that. And same thing here with this, right? This isn't going to be a strategy that I use with every single person. Because again, it could potentially backfire on people, and not everyone's in a great spot to where they need to necessarily do this there. And also, this isn't to say that, say you are someone who's not as lean, you haven't been dieting super aggressively, and you have an event come up, it doesn't mean that you need to be perfect and we can't work around that there. But in order to change your body composition, there does have to be some sacrifices somewhere along the lines, right? So hopefully this was helpful. That's it for this episode. If you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find it. And then if you have any questions on this particular topic, you can just reach out to me on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. Anyways, that's it. I'll talk to you next time.